What if I told you there's a mistake you make every single month, without fail, without even noticing, and that this mistake is silently destroying any real possibility of financial growth in your life? I'm not talking about a big, dramatic mistake, the kind of decision you know was wrong the moment you made it. I'm talking about something far more treacherous, a mistake that looks completely normal, that everyone around you is also making, and that for exactly that reason never raises any suspicion. In this video, you're going to discover what this structural pattern is that keeps millions of people trapped in the same financial cycle month after month, year after year. You're going to understand why it seems inevitable, why most people never manage to see it, and what you can do in a practical and immediate way to break this cycle once and for all. But I need to tell you, what you're about to hear might make you uncomfortable. It might make you question things you considered normal, unavoidable, just part of life. And if you stay until the end, I'm certain you'll leave here seeing your financial life in a completely different way. So stay with me, because what comes next might be the most important conversation you'll have about money in the next several years. Let me start with a scene that I'm willing to bet you'll recognize, maybe even with that slight discomfort of someone being described a little too accurately. Picture a person, it could be you, it could be someone you know, who follows a financial routine that seems absolutely normal. At the beginning of the month, the money comes in. There's that good feeling, that lightness of seeing a positive balance, of feeling like things are under control. Then the bills arrive. Rent, electricity, water, internet, health insurance, installment payments, everything that was already committed before the month even started. After paying all of that, the person looks at what's left and tries to put something away. Sometimes they manage to, sometimes they don't. And when the month ends, the story is always the same. Very little was left over, or nothing at all. And the following month, the cycle starts over in exactly the same way. It doesn't matter if the income went up. It doesn't matter if there was a bonus, some extra income, some unexpected money that came in. The final result stays the same. And the person keeps living this way month after month, convinced that this is simply how things work, that it's the same for everyone, that it's just part of life. Do you recognize yourself in this scene? Because if you do, I need you to understand something fundamental. This is not a coincidence. This is not bad luck. This is a pattern. And patterns have a logic, a cause, a structure that can be identified and that can be changed. The first thing I want you to understand clearly is that the financial problem most people face is not an income problem. It's not a salary problem. It's not an opportunity problem. It's a structure problem. It's a problem with how money is organized, or more accurately, how it isn't organized within a person's life. And the proof of this is simple. If the problem were just about income, getting a raise would solve it. But it doesn't. How many times have you heard someone say that once they earn more, they'll finally be able to save money? And how many times did that person earn more and still end up saving nothing? The income doubled, the lifestyle doubled right along with it, and the leftover amount stayed at zero. That happens because the income wasn't the problem. It was the structure. It was the way money was being handled, the order in which decisions were being made, the system, or the lack of one, that was determining the outcome. And as long as the structure doesn't change, the income can grow as much as it wants, and the result is going to stay exactly the same. Have you lived this? Have you gone through a moment when your income went up, but your financial situation didn't improve proportionally? What happened to that extra money? Now I need to tell you what the mistake is, and I'm going to be direct about it, without any sugarcoating, because you deserve clarity. The most common, most devastating, and most normalized mistake in the financial life of most people has a very simple name: spending what's left over instead of saving what's left over before spending. It sounds obvious when said that way, doesn't it? But in practice, the vast majority of people operate in exactly the opposite way from how they should. The most common cycle is: receive the paycheck, pay the fixed bills, spend what's left throughout the month, and at the end of the month try to save whatever remained from all of that. The problem is that almost nothing ever remains. Because the money that's available after the fixed bills gets consumed gradually through small everyday decisions, through expenses that individually seem irrelevant, but that added together consume everything. And when the end of the month arrives, there's nothing left to save. And the person convinces themselves that the problem was that they didn't earn enough, that it was a hard month, that something unexpected came up. But the truth is that the problem was in the order, in the structure, in the system that was being used or that wasn't being used. And this reversal of order, this logic of saving what's left over instead of spending what's left over after saving, is at the heart of virtually every chronic financial problem that exists. Can you see this dynamic in your own life? What order do you use today? Do you spend first and then save? Or do you save first and then spend? Let me go deeper into this because it's important that you understand not just what is happening, but why it's happening. Behavioral psychology has a name for this phenomenon. Experts call it the resource depletion effect. What does this mean in practice? It means that available money functions as a constant temptation. As long as it's accessible, the brain registers that it's available for use. And the human brain, as I've mentioned before, has a very strong tendency to prioritize the present over the future. So every time you have money available in your account, there's a constant psychological pressure, often unconscious, to use that money now rather than save it for later. That pressure isn't a character flaw. It's the normal functioning of a brain that was shaped by evolution to value the present. And the problem is that we live in a society that was designed to amplify this pressure. Every sale notification, every interest-free installment offer, every payment convenience, all of it was created to exploit this characteristic of the brain and turn available money into spent money before the rational part of the mind has time to evaluate whether it makes sense. Have you ever noticed this dynamic in your own life? That feeling that the money sitting in your account is calling to you, inviting you to use it as if it were bothering you just sitting there. And here's something that most people never stop to think about. The problem isn't having money in the account. The problem is having money available without a clear intention defined for it. When money is in the account without a specific destination, it is, from a psychological standpoint, available for any use. And the easiest, most immediate, most seductively accessible use is always present consumption. It's going out to dinner because you feel like it. It's the piece of clothing that was on sale. It's the subscription to a service that seems useful. It's the slightly more expensive gift because the occasion seemed to call for it. Each of those expenses, individually, seems reasonable. None of them looks like the mistake that's destroying your financial life. But the sum of all of them, over the course of weeks, consumes everything that was available, and at the end of the month, there's nothing left to save. And the cycle begins again. This is what behavioral economists call a lack of pre-committed intention. In simple terms, when you don't decide in advance where the money is going, the money goes where the emotions of the moment send it. And the emotions of the moment rarely say save. They almost always say spend. Do you have the habit of defining in advance where each portion of your money is going before you start spending? Or does the money get allocated as situations come up? Now I want to introduce you to a concept I consider one of the most powerful in all of financial psychology, and that is the direct solution to the problem I just described. This concept is called paying yourself first. It's a simple idea in name, but profoundly transformative in practice. The logic is this: when you receive your money, before paying any bill, before making any expense, before anything else, you set aside a predetermined amount for your savings or investment. You pay yourself first. And only after that amount has been set aside do you use the remainder to pay bills and cover the month's expenses. This completely reverses the order that most people use. Instead of saving what's left over, you save first and spend what's left over. And this changes everything. Why? Because when the savings money has already gone out before you see the rest, it stops competing with all the other demands of the month. It's no longer available to be consumed by the pressure of daily life. It was allocated with intention before any other decision could dispute it. And what happens with the remainder? You adapt. You always adapt. Human beings have an enormous capacity to adjust to what's available. If you receive less in a month because a portion went to savings, you unconsciously adjust your spending to the new level. Not in a painful way. In a natural, organic way, the same way it happens when you take on a new bill and simply start living on what's left. Have you ever tried this reversal of order? Have you ever experimented with saving first and spending after, instead of the other way around? There's something that needs to be said here very clearly, because it's an objection I know just came up in your mind right now. But what if there's nothing left after saving? What if what I earn barely covers the fixed expenses? That's a legitimate concern, and I'm going to be honest with you about it. If your income truly doesn't cover basic necessities, then there's an income problem that needs to be addressed alongside the structure problem. But I want you to be honest with yourself about one thing. Have you ever done a careful and detailed analysis of everything you spend to make sure the problem is really about income and not about allocation? Because most people who believe their income barely covers basic necessities, when they do a detailed mapping of their expenses, discover that there's a significant amount of money going toward things that weren't basic necessities, that were comforts, conveniences, habits that accumulated over time and that today seem indispensable, but that, looked at objectively, could be reduced or eliminated. I'm not saying you should live in deprivation. I'm saying it's worth honestly questioning what is truly a necessity and what is a normalized habit that's consuming resources that could be building your future. Have you ever done this exercise? Have you ever looked honestly at where every dollar you earn is going, with the level of detail that kind of analysis requires? I need to talk about a very specific phenomenon that is related to the mistake we've been discussing and that most people never identify by its correct name. This phenomenon is called lifestyle inflation, and it's one of the biggest silent destroyers of financial potential that exists. Lifestyle inflation happens when, as a person's income increases, their expenses increase in the same proportion or in an even greater proportion. So the person who was earning $3,000 a month and couldn't save anything starts earning $5,000 and still can't save anything. Because the car they had before was traded for a better one. The apartment they lived in was traded for a bigger one. The restaurant they used to go to occasionally became the weekly routine. Clothes got more expensive. Vacations got longer. And all of this happened gradually, naturally, almost imperceptibly, as a consequence of the increase in income. And the person feels like they're living better, like they're progressing, because the standard of living improved. But from a real financial standpoint, they're in exactly the same place. Because what matters is not how much you earn, it's the difference between what you earn and what you spend. And if that difference stays at zero regardless of how much the income grows, real financial growth never happens. Can you identify lifestyle inflation in your own trajectory? Were there moments when your income went up and your expenses went up right along with it, without you ever really making a conscious decision to do that? Now I want to tell you about something that is deeply connected to lifestyle inflation, and that has roots much deeper than simply enjoying comfort or liking nice things. I'm talking about what psychology calls social anchoring. Social anchoring is the human tendency to define what is normal, appropriate, and sufficient based on the standard of the people around you. So when people in your social circle trade cars every 3 years, without you consciously noticing it, you start to feel that trading cars every 3 years is the normal thing to do. When people in your reference group take international trips once or twice a year, without you articulating this as a clear thought, you start to feel that international travel is part of the appropriate lifestyle for someone at your level. When your neighbors renovate their house, you start to feel that yours is outdated. And this process happens in such a subtle, gradual, below-the-surface way that most people never realize they're being influenced by an external standard instead of making genuine choices based on their own values and goals. And the financial result of this anchoring is devastating. You spend to maintain a level that was set by others, not by you. You work to finance a lifestyle that was defined externally, not internally. You trade your financial future for the present validation of the group you belong to or aspire to belong to. Have you ever stopped to question whether the lifestyle you have today was a genuinely personal choice, or whether it was a response to the expectations and standards of the group around you? There's another psychological mechanism that feeds this cycle and that needs to be named clearly: the phenomenon of hedonic adaptation. Hedonic adaptation, also known as the hedonic treadmill, is the human tendency to quickly adapt to new levels of comfort, pleasure, or quality of life, so that what once seemed extraordinary rapidly becomes the new normal and you return to the same level of satisfaction as before. This explains why the new car that gave you so much satisfaction in the first few months after a year already just feels like your car. Why the house you wanted so badly and that made you so happy when you moved in after a while is just where you live. Why the raise that seemed like it would solve everything quickly becomes the new baseline and the satisfaction returns to where it was. Hedonic adaptation is the reason why seeking happiness and satisfaction through a constantly increasing level of consumption is a race with no finish line. You'll always adapt to the new level and feel like you need more. And from a financial standpoint, this race is very expensive, because each new level of comfort you adapt to becomes a fixed cost in your life, a new spending baseline that you can no longer give up without feeling a real sense of loss. And so the spending pattern keeps rising, crystallizing, becoming harder and harder to revisit. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever bought or acquired something that gave you an intense satisfaction at the beginning and that quickly became just part of your everyday life without that initial sense of satisfaction? Let's talk now about something very concrete and very practical, which is the concept of invisible expenses. Invisible expenses are all the costs that leave your account in an automated way or that are so small and so frequent that you stop noticing they're happening. Streaming service subscriptions you rarely use or no longer use, gym memberships you pay for but don't attend, services you signed up for during a promotion that renew automatically every year, apps with monthly charges you forgot you subscribed to, bank fees you've never questioned, insurance policies you pay for but have never reviewed to see if they still make sense. Each of these expenses individually seems small, but the sum of all invisible expenses in a person's life can be surprisingly large. Research shows that most people enormously underestimate the total of their automated recurring monthly expenses when they try to recall them from memory. Because the brain doesn't register what comes out automatically and silently with the same intensity as what requires an active decision. And this means that a significant portion of your money may be draining out every month through services and commitments you don't even know exist anymore. Have you ever done a detailed audit of all the recurring charges that come out of your account every month? Could you list right now every service or subscription you're regularly paying for? Now I need to tell you about something that is the deepest psychological root of the pattern we've been discussing, and that goes far beyond habits and behaviors. I'm talking about the relationship between identity and money, because at the core of every persistent financial pattern there's a belief about who you are, a financial identity that determines, at an unconscious level, the level of prosperity you consider congruent with who you are. And when that identity is set to a certain level, your behavior will systematically ensure that you remain at that level, regardless of how much your income changes. Someone whose financial identity is, "I'm a person who always struggles financially," will unconsciously make decisions that guarantee the struggle continues, because the struggle is familiar, it's congruent with the identity. Someone whose financial identity is, "I'm a person who can't save money," will find ways to spend whatever is left over, because saving would be inconsistent with that identity. And someone whose financial identity includes the belief that wealth isn't for people like me will sabotage themselves at decisive moments, will let opportunities pass, will find reasons not to move forward, because advancing financially would be a threat to the identity they've built about themselves. This is deep and it may be hard to hear, but it's real. And recognizing it is essential. What is the financial identity you carry? When you think of yourself in relation to money, what is the narrative that comes up? Do you see yourself as someone who is building prosperity or as someone who is just surviving? There's something psychology calls a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it operates very clearly in the financial realm. A self-fulfilling prophecy is when you believe something about yourself so consistently that your behavior, unconsciously, begins to confirm that belief. If you believe you'll always have debt, you'll unconsciously make decisions that put you in debt. If you believe you'll never manage to save, you'll unconsciously spend whatever you tried to save. If you believe it's too late to build anything financially, you'll stop trying before the attempt has time to produce results. And the cycle perpetuates itself, not because the belief is true, but because the behavior the belief generates creates results that confirm the belief. To break this cycle, you first need to break the belief. Not through empty affirmations or forced optimism, but through a deep understanding of where that belief came from, of why it isn't a truth about the world, but rather an interpretation built from past experiences, and of how you can consciously choose a different narrative about who you are in relation to money. Can you identify any self-fulfilling prophecy operating in your financial life? Any belief about yourself that is generating behaviors that confirm that belief, creating a cycle that perpetuates itself? Let's talk about something I consider absolutely essential and that rarely comes up in personal finance discussions: the difference between a budget and financial intention. Most people, when they think about getting their finances organized, think about making a budget. And a budget is a useful tool. But the problem is that budgets are passive. They describe what happens but don't necessarily change what's going to happen. It's like writing down everything you eat instead of changing what you eat. The record can create awareness, but awareness alone rarely changes behavior. Financial intention is different. It's the active practice of deciding in advance, with clarity and with purpose, where each portion of your money is going. It's treating money not as something that gets allocated as demands come up, but as a resource you intentionally distribute among the priorities you've defined. And it starts with a fundamental question that most people never ask themselves explicitly. What are my real financial priorities? Not the ones I say they are, not the ones I think they should be, but the ones that become evident when I look at where my money actually goes. Because the truth is that your bank statement is an accurate portrait of your real priorities, not the ones you declare, but the ones your behavior demonstrates. And sometimes that portrait looks very different from what the person believes their priorities are. Have you ever compared your declared priorities with what your bank statement reveals about your real priorities? What would you discover if you made that comparison today? Now, let me tell you about what behavioral finance experts call the envelope system, which is one of the oldest and at the same time most effective strategies for putting financial intention into practice. The original idea was to literally divide physical cash into separate envelopes for each spending category: food, transportation, entertainment, health, and so on. When the envelope for a category ran out, that category's money was gone for the month. Today, this practice can be done digitally, with separate accounts for each goal, with categories defined in a budgeting app, with any system that creates a clear separation between the money designated for each purpose. The power of this system isn't in the technology or the specific tool. It's in the principle behind it. When you give a specific destination to each part of your money before you start spending, you remove the ambiguity that allows money to be consumed by the impulse of the moment. Entertainment money can be spent on entertainment without guilt. Savings money can't be touched because it has another destination. And this creates a much healthier balance than trying to control everything through willpower at the moment of each individual decision. Have you ever tried any kind of money separation system by categories or destinations? How was the experience? What worked and what didn't? I need to talk about a point that is central and that connects everything we've been discussing: the relationship between clarity of goals and financial behavior. One of the deepest reasons why people can't maintain consistency in financial decisions is that they don't have a clear and emotionally meaningful vision of what they're trying to build. Saving money without knowing what for is a dry, flavorless task that competes at a disadvantage against any present pleasure that can be obtained by spending. But saving money for something specific and genuinely important to you, the financial independence that will give you freedom of choice, the peaceful retirement that will allow you to live your final years with dignity, the reserve that will give you the security to take the risks you want to take, your children's education, the fulfillment of a specific dream that completely changes the emotional equation. When the future you're building has a clear image and a real emotional weight, it starts competing in a much more powerful way with the present impulse. Because now, every time you resist an unnecessary expense, you're not depriving yourself. You're actively building something that genuinely matters to you. Do you have a clear and emotionally loaded image of the financial future you're trying to build? Or is the goal vague, something like, I want to have more money without a specific and meaningful destination? Let's get into something now that's very important and that few people address with the seriousness it deserves, the role of family and cultural beliefs about money in the pattern we've been discussing. Because many of the financial behaviors that people carry into adult life were not consciously chosen. They were inherited. They were absorbed in childhood and adolescence through observation, through conversations, through attitudes that were normalized in the family environment. In a family where money was a source of tension, where bills were always a source of anxiety, where the idea of saving seemed like a luxury for those who had more than enough, the child grows up internalizing a relationship with money that is marked by urgency, by scarcity, by the feeling that money is never enough and that trying to plan for the future is naive because the future is uncertain. In a family where money was a symbol of social status, where spending was a way of demonstrating prosperity, where financial appearance was more important than real financial health, the child grows up learning that money exists to be displayed, to communicate value to the outside world, not to be accumulated quietly and strategically. These lessons are powerful and persistent because they were formed during a period when the brain was more permeable, more absorbent, more prone to registering patterns as absolute truths. What lessons about money did you receive from your family? What messages, explicit or implicit, still shape the way you deal with money today? There's something that happens very frequently, and that is a clear symptom of the pattern we've been discussing, but that is rarely recognized as such. It's what I call the illusion of financial control. The illusion of financial control is when a person feels like they have their finances under control simply because they know how much comes in and how much goes out, because they maintain a spreadsheet, because they use a spending tracker app. And that sense of control can be comforting and even useful as a starting point. But it becomes an illusion when the person uses control as a substitute for action. When recording what happens becomes an end in itself instead of a starting point for real change. When the spreadsheet is always up to date, but savings continue to be zero. When the numbers are organized, but behavior hasn't changed. Organizing is important, monitoring is important, but neither of them on their own changes financial reality. What changes reality is action. It's the active decision to do things differently. It's the implementation of a new structure that guarantees different results, even when the motivation of the moment isn't at its peak. Do you have the habit of monitoring your finances? And if you do, is that monitoring generating real changes in behavior, or is it being used as a substitute for change? I want to talk now about something that is fundamental for anyone who wants to break the pattern we've been describing, building an emergency fund. And I know that might sound basic, but I'm going to explain why it's far more strategic than it appears. An emergency fund isn't just financial protection. It's psychological protection. Because one of the main reasons people go into debt, why they put everything on the credit card, why they take out expensive loans, is that when an unexpected expense comes up, they have nowhere to turn. And the unexpected expense, which could have been absorbed quietly by a reserve, becomes a financial crisis that disrupts the budget for months, sometimes for years. An emergency fund breaks this cycle. It creates a cushion that transforms unexpected events into inconveniences instead of financial catastrophes. And from a psychological standpoint, it completely changes how you experience financial life. With a reserve, you have security. With security, you make better decisions. With better decisions, you build more. It's a virtuous cycle that starts with an amount that might seem small, but that has an enormous impact on the quality of your financial and emotional life. Do you have an emergency fund? If you do, is it enough to cover 3 to 6 months of your essential expenses? If you don't, what is stopping you from starting to build one now, even slowly? Let me tell you now about a specific mistake that comes up very frequently when people try to break the financial pattern we've described, and that ends up sabotaging progress before it can consolidate. That mistake is trying to change everything at once. When someone finally decides they want to change their financial life, there's a very powerful initial energy that drives the person to make huge cuts, to save an enormous percentage of their income, to eliminate all expenses that aren't strictly necessary, to implement a completely new financial system from one day to the next. And for a short period, this works. Motivation is high, determination is strong, initial results are encouraging. But then life happens. An unexpected expense, a moment of exhaustion, a hard week, a social situation that calls for a purchase that was outside the plan. And the person who was trying to change everything at once doesn't have the resilience necessary to absorb that deviation. Because drastic changes create a very large internal tension that is hard to sustain over the long term. And when the tension breaks, there's usually a compensation, an exaggerated return to old habits that ends in a worse position than the starting point. Sustainable change doesn't come from intensity. It comes from consistency. A small change that is maintained consistently over months and years has an infinitely greater cumulative power than a drastic transformation that lasts 3 weeks. Have you ever lived this cycle of intense attempt followed by relapse? What happened and what did you learn about yourself in that process? There's a distinction that needs to be made very clearly, and that is at the heart of all real financial transformation, the difference between financial reactivity and financial proactivity. The financially reactive person lives managing crises. They make financial decisions in response to what's happening, not in anticipation of what's going to happen. They pay a bill when the due date arrives, not before. They think about saving when money is left over, not before spending. They consider investing when there's some slack, which rarely happens. And by always living in reactive mode, they never get out of the disadvantaged position. Because they were always responding to situations instead of creating situations in their favor. The financially proactive person acts in anticipation. They set aside savings before looking at the rest. They define their goals before the month begins. They create automatic systems that work toward their objectives even when they're not thinking about it. They anticipate unexpected events instead of being surprised by them. And this difference in posture, which sounds subtle when described, produces completely different financial results over time. Financial proactivity doesn't require more money. It requires a shift in perspective, in temporal orientation, in how you position yourself in relation to your own financial future. Do you operate in a more reactive or more proactive way when it comes to money? Do you tend to act before or after financial situations happen? Now I want to talk about something very concrete that you can start implementing immediately: the monthly financial review. This is not a complicated analysis. It's a dedicated moment once a month for you to look at your financial reality with clarity and honesty, to evaluate whether what happened in the past month is aligned with what you want to build for the future, and to make the necessary adjustments before the next month begins. This can be done in 30 minutes. It can be done at the end of each month or at the beginning of the following one. What matters is that it happens regularly and consistently with the genuine intention of learning from what passed and planning for what's coming. In this review, you look at what went to savings, what went to fixed expenses, what went to variable spending, where there were deviations from what was planned, and what can be adjusted. Not with judgment and self-criticism, but with curiosity and with the intention to improve. Because what isn't measured isn't managed. And what isn't managed stays on autopilot, being determined by the habits and impulses of the moment instead of by your vision and your goals. Do you have the habit of doing a regular financial review? If you don't, what prevents you from setting aside 30 minutes a month to look honestly at where your money is going? We've reached a very important point that I need to address carefully: the question of debt and the role it plays in the pattern we've been discussing. Because for many people, the conversation about saving money and building a healthy financial structure runs into a very concrete reality. There's a debt that is consuming a significant portion of income before any other decision can even be made. And high-interest debt is one of the biggest destroyers of financial potential that exists because it creates an obligation that grows exponentially and that the longer it takes to pay off, the more expensive it becomes. But here's something many people don't know. The strategy of how you pay off a debt matters just as much as the decision to pay it off. There are two main approaches that financial psychology studies, the snowball and the avalanche. With the snowball, you focus on paying off the smallest debt first, regardless of the interest rate, because completely eliminating a debt generates a sense of victory and momentum that sustains the motivation to keep going. With the avalanche, you focus on the debt with the highest interest rate first, because mathematically, that's the most efficient strategy. Which one is better? It depends on you. It depends on how much you need quick wins to maintain motivation. It depends on your psychology. Because the best financial strategy is always the one you'll be able to stick with. Do you have high-interest debts in your life today? And if you do, what is your strategy for eliminating them? Let me tell you about something I consider one of the most important insights of this entire conversation: the concept of opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is what you stop earning when you choose one alternative over another. And in the financial context, the opportunity cost of not saving and not investing is immense, because money that isn't working for you today is money that won't grow tomorrow. Let me give you a concrete example so this becomes very clear. Suppose you have an expense of $200 a month that could be eliminated or reduced without significantly compromising your quality of life. $200 a month seems like a small amount, but $200 a month invested over 10 years with a modest return of 1% per month grows into nearly $50,000. Over 20 years into more than $200,000. That is the opportunity cost of spending those $200 instead of investing them, and this calculation can be made for any amount over any time period. What it reveals is that every financial decision you make today doesn't just have a present impact. It has an enormous future impact that is rarely taken into account at the moment of the decision, because the future seems distant and abstract while present pleasure is immediate and concrete. Have you ever done this kind of calculation? Have you ever stopped to think about what an expense that seems small could turn into if it were invested over the course of years? We're approaching a very important part of our conversation, which is talking about how to actually start. Because one thing is to understand everything that's been set up to here. Another thing is to translate that understanding into concrete action. And the biggest enemy of action isn't lack of knowledge. It's the paralysis generated by complexity, by the feeling that change needs to be complete, perfect, structured from beginning to end before it can begin. The truth is that change starts with one action, a single action that is different from what you do today. It could be opening a separate savings account you've never touched before. It could be setting up an automatic transfer of $50 on payday to that account. It could be auditing all the subscriptions and services you pay for monthly and canceling at least one you don't use. It could be having an open and honest conversation with a partner about next month's budget. It could be sitting down for 30 minutes and writing out the 3 most important financial goals you have for the next 5 years. Any one of those actions taken today already represents a break in the pattern. It's already a vote in a different direction, and each vote accumulated over time builds a new reality. What is the smallest possible action you could take today that would be different from what you've been doing? What is the first step that is within your reach right now? As we come to the end of our conversation, I want you to carry a few core ideas that I hope will make a real difference in your life. The first is that the most common and most devastating mistake in the financial life of most people is not an income mistake. It's a structure mistake. It's the wrong order, spending first and trying to save what's left over instead of saving first and spending what's left over. The second is that this mistake is normalized, it's invisible, it's practiced by most of the people around you, and for that reason it never raises suspicion. But normalized doesn't mean correct. It only means common. The third is that breaking this pattern doesn't require a dramatic and immediate transformation. It requires a change in structure, a new system, implemented consistently over time. And the fourth, and perhaps the most important, is that you have the power to change this. Not tomorrow, not when things get better, not when you earn more. Now, with what you have, from where you are. Because the trajectory changes when the first different decision is made, and that decision can happen today. Tell me in the comments, what was the biggest insight you had here today? And what is your biggest financial challenge right now? Because your answer is going to help me create content that's increasingly relevant for you. I'm here for that, genuinely, conversation by conversation, video by video. Until next time.